Welcome to an episode of Natural Family Planning Works. Natural Family Planning works with your body, for your marriage, and to help you and your spouse respect God's design for married love and the gift of life. Our guest today is Dr. Deborah Savage.
Hello. So much has been made, and rightly so, of St. Paul VI's claim or argument in Humanae Vitae that the marital act reflects two fundamental dimensions that must be present for it to have the sacred meaning it has in the eyes of God. We can quote them off the top of our heads. We don't need to refer to the text. We all know that I'm referring to the unitive and procreative dimensions. But I've decided, I think, that we just can't keep repeating that. It's sort of boilerplate language. And though true, I think we're called to now is to go more deeply into that and consider the anthropology behind the claim, to delve more deeply into the significance it has for both man and woman. So my aim in this particular very brief presentation is to illuminate the underlying meaning of the claim at the heart of Humanae Vitae. I think it is time we approach this in a new way, and I'm going to introduce human experience, which may help. So a little bit of history. I do have a point here, so be patient. I was born in San Francisco and went to college in 1970, barely an hour's drive from the famous Haight-Ashbury district, which is, if you don't know, was really ground zero of the then burgeoning free love movement. I guess you could say I had a front row seat at the beginning of what we now call the sexual revolution. Though I was Catholic, I knew nothing about Humanae Vitae or its teaching. It just didn't come up, believe it or not. I certainly knew what sex was, but had little experience of it. What I did know for sure was that it was hard to get a date those days, unless you had somehow hinted that you might be ready or willing to, so what we called then, go all the way. One young man said to me, as a matter of fact, when I protested that I did not do that sort of thing, what he said was, well, I'd like to hear your reason, but it had better be a good one. I remember feeling panicky as I realized I actually wasn't completely sure why. I did not know how to explain my reasons for saying no to his demand for sex. It was just an instinct, really, for which I had no coherent explanation. But I was fairly certain that to tell him that my mom had told me not to was not going to fly. After all, he had taken me out to a nice dinner. Unfortunately for me, it wasn't until years later that I encountered in any real way the teaching of Humanae Vitae and the work of St. John Paul II. In Love and Responsibility in the Theology of the Body, I found too late the language I ultimately had to work out for myself, the rationale that would have enabled me to respond to the young man who had demanded my reasons for saying no. Most tragic, and this will interest you, this is a problem I feel with the way we approach all this. It wasn't until I went through my own marriage preparation that I encountered the profound intelligence at the core of natural family planning. I learned that my own body can alert me to the signs of my fertility. Who knew? And now I know, and you can be sure that my daughter knows, how I could have responded to that young man's demands. We now know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the teaching of Paul VI was absolutely, undeniably prophetic. Every single warning, every single prediction made by the soon-to-be or the now sainted Pope has come true, documented and demonstrated often by social scientists with absolutely no interest in some obscure papal document. And though Humanae Vitae doesn't mention it, the teaching relies on one simple and undeniable fact that has now disappeared from view. And that is that, at least until relatively recently, it was woman's simple no that had provided the guardrails that managed to stave off what has become really a cultural free-for-all. For centuries, woman's no has been the antidote to the sometimes chaotic sexual impulses of men, particularly young ones. Only animals have sex without thinking about it. And it is woman who knows, if only inchoately, that the significance of that often instinctive refusal. They know it for what it is, an act of self-preservation. In fact, it is this very refusal that invites man into a deeper reflection on who he is. It is because women say no that men must confront their sometimes anyway, own disordered desire. Without this no, men are held captive by their instincts. Their development is stunted. They are prevented from becoming fully themselves. They end up being stuck in an endless childhood, driven by the wish for instant gratification, unable or willing to grow up. And the evidence of that is all around us. But when a man hears no, that act is to be saved for marriage, he must turn inward and ask himself what it is he really wants. He is called then to make something of himself in order to earn the respect and the commitment of his beloved. He prepares himself for the tasks ahead, to provide for and protect his family, to contribute to the common good of his community and the nation. But these days, instead of turning toward a life of commitment and virtue, we see young men who still live in their basements, in their parents' basements, playing video games or hanging out with their friends or drinking in bars, hoping to score, or protesting God knows what, since apparently they have nothing more important to do. They have lost their way because women lost theirs. Though ridiculed by many as mere sexual repression, woman's instinct to refuse the sexual advances of man is in fact a reflection of a profound wisdom held in the deep recesses of her very being. It issues from the aquifer coursing through every woman's body. It is a knowledge that manifests in every sexual encounter, wanted and unwanted, in marriage, outside of marriage. Men, especially men seeking the heroic virtue characteristic of authentic masculinity, can and do understand this, especially intellectually. Contrary to popular opinion, men really can learn to govern their appetites in the name of what is holy, and many do. Indeed, the evidence of the masculine genius is all around us. It has built and sustained civilizations, created systems of law, government, education, protected all of us in times of war and natural disasters. Men serve their families and their communities in countless ways. And for this, they should have not our scorn, but our gratitude. But while woman's vocation is in a sense built into her very body, a man must be initiated into his. He must be summoned to that effort. He must be invited to it. A woman is a mother. A man becomes a father in a certain way. And a man simply cannot know the full meaning of the sexual act as a woman does, for it actualizes a potency that only she possesses. It was and still is, whether they admit it or not, women who understand what is at stake in their simple yes or no. Women who understand, often in a completely pre-verbal way, something about sex that is organically unknowable to men, that it is her very own selfhood, along with its life-giving potencies, that are on the table. For the truth is that all of humanity has no choice other than to pass through the womb to its human destination. Every woman contains within herself, at least potentially, all future humanity. It is this inchoate, hidden understanding that is now laughed at by those who unaccountably have won the right to tell everyone what to think. What has gone unacknowledged is the fact that the stories behind the now almost forgotten Me Too movement predate the Weinstein affair literally by millennia. A careful look at Genesis 3:1 through 24 reveals the truth at the heart of this state of affairs. Both scripture and human experience attest to the fact that the effects of original sin manifest in different ways in men and women. Man's gift, which had been a particular insight into the nature of the created order, suddenly becomes his burden. He will struggle with creation now. Those things he named as his own in Genesis 2 will now yield their fruits only with suffering and backbreaking toil. Instead of occupying the place of secure and confident steward of God's creation, he will now have to fight with it. And in forfeiting his natural relationship with the things of creation, he also loses sight of the gift that woman was and is. He forgets what he had understood in his first glimpse of her, that she was bone of his bones and flesh of his flesh, a person, his match in every way. Man will now tend to treat everything, including woman, as an object. Thus is woman made into a something rather than a someone. She becomes for him a thing to be mastered. While Eve, whose special status as the mother of all humankind earns her the right to a name, and whose very creation marks the entrance of human relationship and community into human history, she finds her own individuality and dignity compromised. Her desire will now be for her husband, even though he wishes only to dominate her, even when she knows he is using her. It is a narrative that has repeated itself throughout history. It repeats itself every day in our contemporary period, in one-night stands, in drunken encounters on college campuses, in the tragedy of domestic abuse, in the horrific spread of pornography. What had been bestowed on each as a kind of genius, reflected in man's capacity for productive use of the goods of creation, and woman's infinite capacity for the person, are now turned upside down, diminished, and distorted. How I wish someone would have pulled me aside in 1970 and helped me to understand the danger my generation and I were in. Where were the priests, the ministers, the adults then? They were either silent, afraid to preach or speak out about it, or applauding from the sidelines, regretful that such a revolution had come too late for them. Had I known then what I know now about my body, about my dignity as a woman, about the meaning of truly fruitful love, how different my life and the lives of countless young women who came of age in that era would have been. And what of the hundreds of thousands of young women who have struggled since, who continue to struggle now to overcome their natural instinct toward modesty and their predisposition to decline male advances outside of a committed, loving relationship? Though many women are still secretly hoping for a steady boyfriend, Many more are well on their way to finally replacing that instinct with their own now hyperactive libido. Having finally accepted that what they are looking for is merely a romantic myth they absorbed by watching Cinderella when they were little, they have now moved on to the theme from Frozen. Let it go, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. Women are finally on the verge of the liberation they were promised so many years ago. It has taken a while, but maybe they finally understand that the only thing that really matters is absolute individual autonomy. Even though in her heart of hearts, it is relationship she seeks, woman is now finally poised at the possibility that real freedom means the right to liberate oneself from one's nature. That real freedom means the freedom to refuse something already given, the gift of who one actually is. But here's the problem. What happens if women, the bearers of life, finally accept that the ideal way to live is to model their lives on the pattern suggested by the impulses of a 16-year-old teenage boy? The contemporary sexually active woman may not grasp the source of her discomfort or her bitterness, but it is not hard to comprehend. For though it is never acknowledged, promiscuity, the hookup culture, thoughtless sexual encounters, meaningless sex, all these factors, though certainly primary contributors to the decline of manhood in our culture, are actually destructive of women in a way that simply cannot be said of men. Man's fundamental orientation is an external gaze. He faces outward. From his bodily design to the objects of his attention to the types of activities that engage him, he is turned toward the world. For him, the sexual act is itself ordered outside of his body. His seed literally leaves his body. His involvement is momentary. Not so for the woman. Woman's gaze is toward the internal. She bears everything on the inside. Who women are, from the design of our bodies to the things that concern us, to the life of the child we have the capacity to carry. All this is immanent, hidden. It is the inner life that catches the woman's attention. What simply must be understood is that for a woman, the sexual act is an invitation to the man, or at least an agreement, to enter inside her, to enter into her very being. Sexual intercourse is an actual penetration of woman's inner self. When not accompanied by love and commitment, it is an act of pure, unadulterated theft, a theft that is permanent, of something that cannot be retrieved. She will not recover when she is used for the pure pleasure of it, no matter how hard she tries to feel whole again, for she holds within herself the memory of having been entered and of what was lost. To anyone intent on teaching the practice of natural family planning or helping our young women and men to grasp the significance of the sexual act, I offer this undeniable truth. It is woman who holds the union of the procreative and unitive dimensions together in her very body. In some silent, organic way, she grasps the truth of John Paul II's claim in Love and Responsibility, that the sexual act is man's participation in the very transmission of existence. And because this transmission travels along the axis that links heaven and earth, it has the force of an electrical current. Deny its nature, and it's like trying to grab a power line. Come too close without the right formation, or without the right intention, and there will be a short. Human sexuality is at the core of man's essence, which is why the serpent never tires of meddling in it. But it is woman who is or must be grounded. When she is the equivalent of a heat sink. And she understands that in the sexual act, she will discover her capacity for self-gift. She knows in the depths of her being that it is a gift that must be radical and total for it to have the full meaning it has, not only in the eyes of God, but for her. And she knows that in making that gift to a man who truly loves her, she reveals to him the gift that he is. In offering herself as a gift and in accepting the gift of her beloved, she illuminates the nature of the gift that is at the heart of married love. Woman is the guardian, the keeper of the gift of self, because it is only in her body that the fruits of that gift, new life, take root, grow, and are born. The contraceptive mindset that governs our culture is an affront to the dignity of women because it is a declaration that who she is in her very being is not wanted. Woman's fertility is not a disease. It is not an inconvenience. It is at the heart of the gift she is to the world. Whether or not a woman becomes a mother in the physical sense or in the spiritual, her infinite capacity for the other is a feature of who she is. It is her task to remind all of us that all human activity must be ordered toward authentic human flourishing. Women have rights because they are human, not because they are finally able to act like men. They are not men. The culture must stop trying to make our bodies behave as though they are. For unless we acknowledge what is truly at stake here, the tragedy we have witnessed will play out for yet another generation and then another generation after that. Unless and until woman's full destiny, not apart from her natural capacity to nurture life, but inclusive of it, is seen for what it is, our world will always be populated with one generation after another of permanently adolescent males and wounded women. The church's teaching affirms the natural instinct for modesty and gallantry that both women and men know in their heart of hearts they are called to honor. These are the things that are at stake in the teaching of NFP. Not only the creation of human families, but also, and just as important in many ways, our jointly held mission to create human history itself. Thank you for your kind attention.